in buds, you spend hundreds of hours running around with heavy boats on your head. You spend hundreds of hours PTing with 300-pound telephone poles and running with those things and freezing in the surf zone. And I spent just under 21 years in the SEAL teams, and I did hundreds of combat missions, and I did thousands of training evolutions, and never on one of those did I ever carry a boat on my head or a telephone pole on my shoulder, right? So what that told us and told me as I was doing this research was that what they were doing to us in SEAL training wasn't training us on how to be Navy SEALs. Those weren't skills that SEALs need in terms of shooting a gun or skydiving. What they were doing was seeing if we could do the job, if we had what it took, because inherently special operations is uncertain, it's unknown, and you're thrown into these environments of deep uncertainty, stress, and challenge, and you are expected to perform.
Welcome to the Spartan Up podcast with Joe Sena, founder and CEO of Spartan Race.
We are talking about overcoming obstacles. The same way we teach people to get over obstacles on the course, we will teach you here on the Spartan Up podcast to get over obstacles in your mind.
What are the essential attributes you need to succeed on a Spartan course, as an athlete, or as an entrepreneur? Rich Diviney served over 20 years as a Navy SEAL officer. His new book, The Attributes, defines those key qualities, how to assess them, and how to develop them. Today's episode of Spartan Up is brought to you by BetterHelp. Spartan Up listeners can save 10% on their first month by going to betterhelp.com/Spartan.
Joe Sena here for Spartan Up Podcast. I am with Rich Diviney, Navy SEAL. And I can't say, do I say retired Navy SEAL? Once a Navy SEAL, always a Navy SEAL. Like, how do I say it?
Retired is fine. I mean, former works. I'm one of those guys who thinks, I like to really honor those guys who are still doing the job. And I had my time in the barrel, and the guys who have the watch now are the guys doing the job. So I'm a former Navy SEAL, certainly retired. I don't do the job anymore. That's left to the younger men who are doing awesome work. So hats off to them.
Yeah, the whole world, I think, doesn't matter what country you live in, respects. I think literally respects the entire U.S. military, but especially the SEALs. How do you feel about? I know I'm going down a rabbit hole here. I apologize. Delta, Marine Recon, you guys all work together. Is it a little competitive?
It is competitive, but it's in a good way. And I think U.S. SOCOM formed in the 80s, and that was meant to bring us all together kind of under one roof. But really what the war has done is made us all kind of work together even more closely and in a really positive way. So those guys, I have tons of friends in those communities, and they're all wonderful dudes. They all bring, all the units bring their unique specialties to the table, and I think combined we just make such a formidable force. So it's cool to have the communities working together today, as they really weren't as much in the early 80s, certainly before U.S. SOCOM was formed.
There's a term I use for Spartan. I say it's camaraderie amongst competition, right? So like you guys are all one unit, but it's a little competitive.
Yeah, it's like the healthy, right? So it's like you and I getting into a boxing ring. We're not in there to beat the crap out of each other. We're there to make each other better, and I think that's where healthy competition comes in, because you want to push each other in ways that make yourselves better. And you kind of look over and say, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" And they're like, "Oh yeah." And the cool thing is, there's no hiding it, right? No one hides their techniques or procedures or their unique boxing moves. Like, "Hey, let me show you this," and that forces us all to kind of rise, all boats rise with the rising tide, right? And that's kind of the philosophy. So it's a neat thing.
I agree. Now, you've cracked a code on something that's been bugging me for 45 years. So I grew up in a neighborhood, and I have no idea why I became a student of this, but there were a lot of organized crime in my neighborhood. And I saw the movie Rocky with Sylvester Stallone. You don't know where this is going. And I was confused and attracted to this idea that, like, after Rocky made some money, he kind of lost his fire a little bit. And then I compared that to, wow, there's these tough organized crime guys, but their kids are not as tough as they are. And so I just started thinking, and then I was hiring people in my own business, and I was thinking, gee, I just want animals working with me. I want to be around, kind of like the Navy SEALs, Delta, Special Force. Like there's a special breed of person that you want to recruit, and any company wants to recruit, right? Any organization wants to recruit. You've figured out the key attributes. Is that a correct way of putting it?
Yeah, I think it is. It's this idea that we are driven. Our behavior is driven not really by skill. I mean, skills direct our behavior for known things. Throw a ball, ride a bike. But really, what defines our behavior, especially in challenge, uncertainty, and stress, are those innate qualities that we bring to the table. And the analogy I use is that, and very relatable to kind of the Spartan race, but in BUDS, basic underwater demolition SEAL training, where guys go as sailors to become SEALs. I mean, you spend hundreds of hours running around with heavy boats on your head. You spend hundreds of hours PTing with 300-pound telephone poles and running with those things and freezing in the surf zone. And I spent just under 21 years in the SEAL teams. And I did hundreds of combat missions, and I did thousands of training evolutions, and never on one of those did I ever carry a boat on my head or a telephone pole on my shoulder, right? So what that told us and told me as I was doing this research was that what they were doing to us in SEAL training wasn't training us on how to be Navy SEALs. Those weren't skills that SEALs need in terms of shooting a gun or skydiving. What they were doing was seeing if we could do the job, if we had what it took, because inherently special operations is uncertain, it's unknown, and you're thrown into these environments of deep uncertainty, stress, and challenge, and you are expected to perform and solve problems. And so the unconscious genius of the training in any special operations community is this idea that they're teasing out these attributes that define whether or not you have what it takes to do the actual job.
And then I'm going to apply it to my own life, just selfishly. Some stuff came up actually last night at dinner with my family. But during that process of BUDS, can a person develop some of those attributes, or they either have them or they don't when they start?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. My sense is, due to the extremity of BUDS in a situation like that, you have to have at least some of it to make it through. And I would imagine that those guys who don't make it through just don't have enough of each. And the good news is we all have all of these attributes. The question is, how much of each one do we have? My level of adaptability might be on a level 8 from a scale from 1 to 10, and someone else's might be a level 2. And there's no judgment on that. It'd be like judging our hair color, right? It's just how we show up. But I think that anybody who shows up to SEAL training, first getting to SEAL training in the first place takes some grit and takes these attributes, right? So that's step one, is getting there, getting the beaches of Coronado. But then going through it is going to take a whole nother level. And I think that that while those of us who made it through and then continued on with SEAL careers definitely hyper-developed those attributes, I don't think you can go and make it through if you don't have any of them.
Yeah, and there's probably something, like you said, there's something about the person that signs up, that raises their hand and says, I want in. So I run something, I don't know if you know, called the death race. And I don't have a military background, so I just approached, the reason I came up with it, the reason I approached it was business is pretty hard. Not getting shot at like you guys, right? The missions are, but it's pretty hard. And I was just thinking, like, I want to be around people that are adaptable. I like that word you use. Clearly you found, and I don't know this, I'm learning as I talk to you, that's a key attribute, that adaptability. And I remember being in an Ironman as I was developing this death race, and a bunch of elite athletes quit the race because it was raining too much. And that just infuriated me. That would be like tapping out in the middle of a business meeting because it was I just couldn't understand it. And so I said, I want to create a race, death race, that everything that can go wrong goes wrong. Like if you came out of the swim, the bike seat would be missing on your bike, but you would deal with it. Anyway, I did this race for years. Because of the pandemic, I had nothing to do this summer. I did one for the kids, but I took it up 14 notches. Because I could with kids, right? Adults would have said, no thanks. Kids had no choice. And it was 14 days. Would you call it, what would you call 14 days, an evolution? What would you call the 14 days in your
Yeah, I would say certainly an evolution is good. If it's a beginning and the end, yeah, you could call it an evolution, I guess. Yeah.
14-day evolution on the farm this past summer, friends and family. Nobody paid. This was really just for my own pleasure. And they were up every morning. I had a mountain warfare guy who I don't think he was ever a drill sergeant, but he must have picked up some of those skills along the way. And every morning, 5 a.m., wake up, screaming at them. They didn't have their bibs right. They weren't organized in the cold water. And then carrying rocks up the mountain. Each day was 15, 16 hours. Anyway, my wife and the parents had almost like an intervention with me last night. And they said, well, we were thinking, we should tell the kids if you do it this year, what's going to be coming each day, what the tasks are going to be. And I don't know. Am I thinking about this right? I'm starting to, everybody's against me. Everybody. I'm wondering, am I crazy or am I thinking about this right?
No, I think you're thinking about it right, and I'm certainly not against you. I'm a huge fan of everything you do, and I love your backstory because it's so it speaks to kind of who you are and what you're made of, and all these attributes I kind of talk about. It's interesting when we start talking about kids and attributes, and that's just something I had to kind of think about. And I didn't write too much about this in the book. I didn't write about it at all because I knew it was a rabbit hole that would have taken the book to be 900 pages, and I would have never gotten it done. But we're so plastic. From a neurological level, we're sponges. When we're from age of birth till about 22, and so we are learning things and developing things so rapidly. And even though these attributes are innate and inherent, so we all are born with levels of adaptability and courage and resilience and self-efficacy. They are developed over time as well, right? So we all have these levels, and then we develop them over time. And I think, much like our value systems, much like beliefs, much like our purpose, or whatever our why is, I think there's a maturation period that is necessary for kids as they go through their early stages of life, and then as they go into teens. And again, you and I can relate to this. You can relate to this because your maturation process happened while you were a kid, while you were running your pool business, while you were kind of running in the neighborhood and learning those lessons. These things were forging you. And they were doing so inside of an environment. I don't know if I was forged as much. I had a really, kind of nice childhood. It was average on most levels, but something in there forged me in a way that allowed me to get through SEAL training. And so I think when it comes to kids, I think it's okay to put kids, at least at a certain age, through that stuff. But what we have to be careful of is judging the attributes in the moment, because these experiences will help them forge certain things and learn things about themselves that then develop or hyper-develop these attributes in a way that shouldn't, for example, if a kid goes through and just, doesn't feel like getting up on day 3 and running rocks up the mountain. I would offer it's probably not as much because that kid doesn't have the attributes. That kid's just feeling it out. That kid's figuring out what their engine looks like, and I've heard you use this analogy. I use it as well. I mean, if we think of ourselves as automobiles, right, and we're all specific, engines, and I always say we're all human, right? So we're all automobiles, but some of us are Jeeps, some of us are Ferraris, some of us are SUVs, right? And there's no judgment to that because the Jeep can do things the Ferrari can't do, and the Ferrari can do things the Jeep can't do. The key is, and what I get fascinated with is figuring out our own engine. Okay, lift the hood and say, okay, what engine am I? What vehicle am I? Because I might be a Jeep trying to run on a Ferrari track, or I might be a Ferrari trying to run on a Jeep track. And so I think that aging process, whatever's thrown at us, are simply developmental tools to help us figure out our engine. So I think those types of events for kids, if there's an equation in there added in where you can sit the kids down and say, hey, listen, this is what you learned about yourself. And there's no judgment there, right? This is what you learned about yourself when you were able to carry the rocks up the hill, 5 days in a row. That's something you learned. Or, hey, you felt like you couldn't do it. That's something you learned, right? And it just, there has to be, I think, some very careful consideration to not judging those and not letting the kids feel judged, because, again, it's like judging hair color, right? And instead saying, hey, that kid might feel like they're a little bit lower on adaptability, right? But the cool thing about attributes is attributes can be developed. The difference between a skill and an attribute is, well, I can teach you a skill, right? I could teach you how to shoot a gun and hit a target. I could do that in about 3 hours, right? I can't teach you something like patience or adaptability. I can sit down in class and say, hey, here's how to do it. That has to be self-motivated, self-directed, and it has to take a deliberate choice for that individual to put themselves into environments that test and tease out that attribute. So what you don't want to do is create a blockage in a kid's mind that says, you know what, screw that adaptability stuff. I don't want any of it because it was so painful or whatever. So I think that's where the balance probably has to come when we're talking about attributes and kids, at least people under the age of, say, 20 or 21, right, when we're still really plastic.
And that's great advice. And the beauty of it is you're going to help that kid get through that third day or fourth day when they don't want to do that, right? And then they're going to look back and say, hey, we had a girl, my friend's daughter, during this whole thing, and you've seen this a million times in your career. She was broken. She was crying. She could not understand why we were even doing, like, it made no sense. She's smart enough to go to MIT. She's never done a push-up in her life. What was the point of doing this? And we had the conversation, which was, hey, listen, MIT is going to be pretty hard. Math problems are pretty hard. You're going to want to know that you could grind through things and get them done. And somehow we got her to get back to going up and down the mountain and getting in the cold water and doing it. And she transformed over those 14, literally transformed. And
yeah, and so that you make a great point, right? The help is the key thing. When people start working together and they understand, hey, you can actually lean on each other. Teams, high performing teams are formed from these attributes and skills being meshed and intertwined in a way that if I'm at a deficit, my buddy can help fill that deficit. He can help pull me along. Or I say, hey, it happens in great marriages too. Great marriages that last a long time. You are a team. My wife, I'm a patient person. My wife is impatient. Well, sometimes when we're raising kids, as you know, patience is required. And so I step up and I take lead, right? Sometimes when raising kids, impatience is required, right? My wife steps up and takes lead. So you begin to, these are lessons that are forged in terms of leaning on each other. Nobody's an island. And I think one of the reasons why I'm so interested in the elemental things that make up something like grit. Grit was always very interesting to me because grit has often been talked about as if it's an attribute on its own. But what I realized was like, hey, it can't be that. It's so much more than just one thing. And so I kind of really began to break it down and say, hey, at least in the SEAL world, and I think the Spartan race world, and I think most places, it broke down for me into these 4 attributes. Like what makes up grit? Blended and catalyzed, what is that? Well, it's courage, the ability to step into the things we fear, right? It's perseverance, the ability to push through with either persistence, tenacity, and fortitude. It's adaptability, because I can adapt, and adaptability, the environment is changing around me in a way I can't control. So can I shift and mold and move? And then it's resilience. I get knocked off baseline. Can I come back? Can I be like the rubber band and come back? Those 4 things, blended and catalyzed, make up grit. So you take each of those 4 things, and then you say, okay, I can actually take each one of these things and apply them to MIT work or my job or my business, right? Now I can take these elements, because sometimes that business presentation is going to take courage because you're afraid of getting up in front of people and talking. It's going to take perseverance. Well, I guess I got to work hard. I got to get ready to do it, and I got to do it. It's going to take adaptability. I'm giving the presentation and the projector goes out, right? And then it's going to take resilience. I do the presentation, and the boss says, well, that was okay. And now I got to absorb that hit and then bounce back and be better than I was before, right? So I think that's where I'm really interested in breaking these down, and have been in these elemental attributes, because it ubiquitizes this stuff in a way that says, hey, the stuff that you do and the stuff that I learned on the beaches of San Diego and throughout my career can be extracted and given to people who will never have that chance to be on the beaches of Coronado or do a Spartan race. And I think that's really fascinating to me.
Yeah. And so let's go through what attributes have you found to be the most important? I'm gonna lean towards grit being the most, and the components that make up grit being the most important. But I heard you use the word patience the other day, and I read this great quote that it's not just being patient, but it's how you act while you're being patient.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, totally.
So what are the key attributes? Because my HR department is about 7 feet from me where I am right now. Once I'm done with you and we're done with this talk, I'm going to walk over there and say, listen, my Navy SEAL buddies tell me this is the only kind of people we hire from now on.
Today's episode of Spartan Up is brought to you by BetterHelp. We'll be right back to the interview, but first, I want to tell you a little bit about them. This has been a tough year for a lot of people, and mental health is finally something that people are talking about. So many people are struggling right now. Therapy can help. Sometimes the bravest thing to do is to do the hard thing, which is asking for help. BetterHelp says therapy helps. So what is therapy? Well, BetterHelp says it's whatever you want it to be. It doesn't have to be sitting around talking about your feelings. With BetterHelp, you can talk to someone privately if you're just not feeling right, or you're having trouble dealing with stress or issues with your relationships. Whatever you need, you don't need to be ashamed of normal human struggles. You can feel better. Spartans, you deserve to be happy. And with BetterHelp, it's a little bit easier. You don't have to worry about finding an in-person therapist near you. You can get help from home. BetterHelp is customized online therapy that offers video, phone, even live chat sessions with your therapist. So you don't even have to see someone on camera if you don't want to. Times are tight financially too, but the good news is that BetterHelp is more affordable than in-person therapy. And you can get going really quickly. You can be communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. So join the millions of people who are seeing what therapy is really about. What's the greatest investment you can make? Investing in yourself, because you are your greatest asset. Make that asset function even better. Today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp, and you, Spartan Up listeners, get 10% off your first month by going to betterhelp.com/Spartan. That's betterhelp.com/Spartan.
What attributes have you found to be the most important? I mean, I'm gonna lean towards grit being the most, and the components that make up grit being the most important. But I heard you use the word patience the other day, and I read this great quote that it's not just being patient, but it's how you act while you're being patient.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, totally.
So what are the key attributes? Because my HR department is about 7 feet from me where I am right now. Once I'm done with you and we're done with this talk, I'm going to walk over there and say, listen, my Navy SEAL buddies tell me this is the only kind of people we hire from now on.
Well, so this gets into some complexity that's very interesting, right? And here's one factor that I really figured out too. When I was doing this, I was running training for a very specialized command, and I was asked to articulate why guys made it through and didn't. And this particular assessment and training was separate from your regular basic SEAL training. And the excuses we had, the reasons we had why guys weren't making it were like, well, this guy, he couldn't shoot very well or couldn't skydive. And it didn't make sense because the guys we were bringing for this selection, they were like the top dudes, right? So it didn't make sense to us, to the candidate, to the leadership. So I said, okay, it has to be based on these attributes. And so the first thing we did was we brought together committees at our specific command and said, okay, what are the attributes we're looking for? What does that list look like? Okay, and we created that list. And at that time, it was 36 attributes we were looking for. But what that tells us is that every job, every organization, every team is going to have its own specific set of attributes. So the attribute list that you need, that's required to be a great accounting team, is going to be different than the attribute list required to be a great Navy SEAL team, than to be a nursing team, to be whatever. You pick the thing. So step number one is, okay, figure out those attributes. Now, I will agree with you. The grit attributes are pretty helpful in any environment. So courage, perseverance, adaptability, resiliency, I think all four of those are important. In the environments where you're dealing with tough stuff on a more frequent basis, which I throw your organization into that category, some of the mental acuity attributes start to make to come to light, right? So the four mental acuity attributes are situational awareness, compartmentalization, task switching, and learnability. What's interesting is, I bin those to kind of describe how the brain works and how we process the world. I would actually throw compartmentalization underneath the grit categories as well, because compartmentalization is enormously important when talking about grit. And the way I would define grit is, overall, is like, how can you just push through? So, and you kind of talk about more smaller, intense type stuff. Because if we start talking about longer type stuff, we get into the drive attributes. Drive attributes are more concerned with, okay, what's the long-term audacious goal that you're going to start day one and however many days later you're going to do. So it's different than a race or a hell week or things like that. And so you get into those attributes and say, okay, what are important there? And those are self-efficacy, discipline, open-mindedness, cunning, and narcissism. Believe it or not, we can talk about that later if we want. And then, of course, there's leadership attributes that I talk about. So based on your organization, who are the leaders? What attributes should they be displaying, or what should you look for in those people you have in charge? And then there are the team ability attributes. What are the attributes that cause people to really be effective and efficient working with other people? So I would say we could develop the list. What we'd want to do is we'd say, okay, what are those? What first of all in your organization, which is a big one, what are the ones you're looking for in each facet? I mean, there's going to be a set of attributes you're looking for the folks who are running the race, who are like out there doing the deed. Folks who are working the administration stuff, folks who are actually leading the whole organization. Those lists are going to be slightly different. I think the cool project is to say, okay, which are the ones we're looking for? Do we have a predominance of each one in the team? And if we don't, we can actually start to hire properly. Instead of hiring for skill or just skill, you can say, actually, I'm gonna look for people who have these attributes, which is really effective.
I would say there's a few attributes, going back to that neighborhood conversation, there's a few attributes that, like, I want the accounting team, the legal team, everybody to have. Right, there's a few of them, and that's that like show up early, tons of energy, tireless type people. Think of mopping the floor before you have to ask. Like, what are those? Because those, no matter what, you want your kids to have those.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think those are the grit ones. Those are the drive ones. I think so. So you'd say you want, self-efficacy, for example. Self-efficacy is this idea that you are, you understand, you are confident enough in yourself. You're optimistic and you're realistic, and you have initiative. It's kind of a combination of those three things: confidence, optimism, and initiative. And I think a preponderance of those in anybody is going to really serve anybody well. Discipline, and discipline again is more focused on the long-term goal, right? It's different. I had to separate this, interestingly enough, from self-discipline because what I realized is that there are people out there, I'm one of these people, who could be very disciplined overall. In other words, I'm very good at setting and achieving long-term audacious goals, but I have a hard time with self-discipline, and so I had to separate those two. And the way I separated it was really self-discipline speaks to those things that you and only you have control over, right? If you want to eat better, it takes self-discipline. I can go to the Vegas buffet, right? Nothing about that buffet is going to make me eat the crappy stuff. It's about me. So my external environment has no say in whether or not I eat better, for the most part. Discipline are those things that you have the perseverance and the ability to achieve long-term goals, and those goals are such that the external world has a say. That's becoming a Navy SEAL. That's becoming a top trader on Wall Street. That's becoming an author. The external world has a say. So discipline, I think open-mindedness, because again, that's a big one. I think humility. Humility is absolutely, that's an essential one in terms of a team understanding. Those are the people who come in early and are curious about what other people are doing and are always helping. Conscientiousness is the person who's always looking for something to do, and that's a great quality to have in a team, because it's like, okay, I'm done with my stuff. Who needs help? That's what you want to see. And then humor, because humor, again, we all know, I think you could probably speak to this as well. One of the best things I loved about the SEAL teams was the humor. I remember laughing so hard that we were crying in some of the most miserable situations you can imagine on Earth, right? Because we were just designed to start making jokes. It actually is a detriment when you get out of the Navy and you're, walking down your Navy, you're just in normal life and someone tells you something that's somewhat, I say somewhat tragic because it's kind of like a first world tragic, and I start laughing and my wife's like, what the hell are you doing? Because it shows no empathy, but really I'm designed to kind of make a joke. So humor is a huge one. So I think those are selflessness, authenticity. So I think those are all really essential for most people. And then there's some some other ones, like, you talked about patience. I talk about patience in the book and I call it kind of a bi-directional attribute, because what I talk about is it's an attribute that regardless of what polarity you are, you can actually be enormously successful, right? You could be very patient and be highly successful. You could be very impatient and be highly successful. So there are three that I talk about that are bi-directional. It doesn't matter what side of the scale you lay on. It can be really, really good for you. So I think those are probably a good start.
I like that. I like that a lot. I could see instituting a new policy that says anyone who doesn't over-index on these is out.
Right. Yeah. And it's a challenge, and someone can decide if I'm not, if I feel like I'm a little bit lower on conscientiousness, so I just have to make a decision to say, okay, I'm going to work hard, I'm going to be diligent, I'm going to be reliable. Those are the three things that make it up, and I'm going to be looking for something to do. That's what I'm going to constantly do.
And when did the book come out?
It came out January 26th, so just over a month ago. Yeah.
And how do people get it?
Well, so go to theattributes.com. That's the one way. And there, so we've built an assessment tool. So you can go on there and take an assessment on, see where your grit attributes lie, your mental acuity attributes, your drive attributes. Still working on the leadership and team ability ones. But those three are free. Again, those are just a quick caveat. If you go and take that, that's a comparisons, right? So we pushed out a bunch of data, got about 1,000 people around the world to come back. So when you go and you get your adaptability score, the user just has to know, hey, that's how I show up on adaptability as compared to 1,000 other people. So it's going to take some self-introspection and say, okay, is that real for me? Does that make sense? But you can do that on the website. And then I threw together some workbooks on the website that you can that show you how to develop each attribute. If you want to develop one, here's some steps. So you could go there, and then of course I'm on Instagram and what is it? Oh, LinkedIn as well. So
let's end it with this. You've got these key attributes. It doesn't matter who you are, what you're doing. You just describe them and name them that really matter and move the needle for people. You've been doing this for a long time. What are things people should do on a daily basis? 3-5 things on a daily basis to kind of sharpen some of those key attributes.
Okay, first, sharpen courage by continually to step into those things that make you uncomfortable. Okay, it doesn't have to be extreme. It doesn't have to be a Navy SEAL training or even a Spartan race right away, but it can be starting a conversation with a stranger if you're somewhat of an introvert. But those things that make you anxious and nervous, stepping into that will give you a dopamine reward, right? You're neurologically rewarded by that. So courage, step into fear. Practice being adaptable. This is when the environment starts changing around you. You can ask yourself some questions. Hey, okay, if I just let this go, what's the worst that can happen? Because a lot of times the worst, what we think is the worst, is simply a figment of our imagination, right? And then you can say, if I do go with this, go with the flow, what's the best that can happen? You can start to adapt and just recognize that nothing in the known universe, as far as we know, doesn't change over time, right? So we can either be the frog or the dinosaur. So if you can't adapt, you'll be a dinosaur, you'll go extinct. So that's just something to remember. Resiliency, you can practice resiliency. And again, resiliency is be able to bounce back, get back to baseline. So a great tool that one of my favorite commanding officers used to give us, he called it the 2-minute rule, taught by his own grandfather. Said, hey, anything bad happens, right, during a day or whatever, you have 2 minutes to mourn, to kick the dirt, to wallow, whatever. After that 120 seconds, get back to baseline, get back to what you're doing, all right? Now, that also goes for when anything good happens, okay? You got 2 minutes. Celebrate, pat yourself on the back, rest on your laurels, whatever that needs to happen. 120 seconds later, get back to baseline, keep moving on. So that's a way we can practice resilience. And then finally, something I always encourage people to do, and something I've done since I was in high school, and you see most, if not every high performer do it, is ask better questions. We are neurologically designed to answer questions. Our brains do it all the time. Now, and it's usually unconscious, if we take charge of that and lodge a question into our frontal lobe, our brain immediately begins to come up with answers. Okay, we could practice this. We can ask yourself any question on a piece of paper and just start writing down answers. Your brain will start coming up with answers. Oftentimes we do this without thinking it, and we do it the wrong way. We say things like, why does this always happen to me? Why am I so bad at this? Why are these people out to get me? As soon as you lodge that question, your brain starts to come up with answers, and they're usually ridiculous. You can take charge of that process and ask better questions. What have I learned from this? How can I grow? What are some great things about the situation? And I am a true believer that the quality of our lives is directly proportional to the quality of questions we consistently ask ourselves, right? So we can take charge of this today and feel better right away.
I love that. That's awesome. I'm going to invite you. Hopefully, you have time to come to this year's kids' death race, and you could do. We could really have some fun there and see if we could develop and help hone these kids.
Love to. It'd be an honor. So, and it's an honor to be here with you today. So, thank you.
Thanks for taking the time with me. You kidding me? I'm always super pumped when I'm around anybody in the military, and then take it up a notch. Navy SEALs, you're a show off.
Yeah, no, you're right. That's true. So,
you're awesome.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Spartan Up Podcast. Spartan Up is your partner in resilience for mind, body, and spirit. We're here 3 days every week. Tuesdays, you can find Joe Sena, founder and CEO of Spartan, interviewing biohackers, business leaders, authors, and athletes. Thursdays and Saturdays, catch episodes from our DECA, Endurance, Trail, Combat, and La Ruta series. Do you know someone who needs a little nudge? Maybe they could use some motivation, tactics to be stronger, healthier, happier, more successful. Tell them about our show. And if you're watching on YouTube, leave us a comment. We want to know who's watching and who's listening. Thanks. See you next time. Today's episode of Spartan Up is brought to you by BetterHelp. Spartan Up listeners can save 10% on their first month by going to betterhelp.com/Spartan.